All right, guys, I'm back. February. I mean, that shit happened. And I watched some movies, so let's talk about them. And I started off this month just looking for something very disposable, and man, did I find the right thing for that. Incoming is a Netflix movie, and it's kind of like what if Superbad and Dazed and Confused were made for Netflix? Oh, and what if those movies weren't as good? Now, I will say this movie's heart is in the right place. You know, it's all about growing up and being yourself. You know, nice things like that. And if people going into high school really watch this and take that message to heart, I guess this movie's worth it. But as a coming of age comedy and one that is highly derivative, it's just not quite funny or charming enough. I guess I chuckled a couple times, but there wasn't a whole lot of bite to the dialogue, and all of the main group of kids were just awkward and insecure in the same way. It was just like watching a bunch of copies of the same person, which made its overall high school environment not too believable. Not the worst movie, but it definitely could have been quite a bit better. Nickel Boys had a spot on my best of the year list, and I don't regret putting it there, so you know, it's great. So if you want some of my more full thoughts on Nickel Boys, you should just go there. I think that would be a cool use of your time. Unless you want to go outside. That's cool too. The Apprentice is the origin of Donald Trump, a man of current importance, and it took me a while to watch this, but I'm glad I did. This movie could have gone wrong in so many ways, and while it's not an all-timer, it's an engaging and well-shot movie that knows what it wants to do. There are so many thoughts about Donald Trump that come out of people's mouths in 2025, and so to make a movie about this subject matter is kind of just asking to be hated. So I'm glad this movie made the right decision and just kind of decided to lay back. This is a very simple depiction of the beats in a person's life that would turn them into Donald Trump. The Apprentice doesn't need to slant anything or to take a more subjective view in order to make him look like a villain. But in the fact that the movie is a satisfying origin of the figure, it's also a very human one. Because the way Donald Trump acts now, it's not real.
No, get those lights off!
He just kind of loafs around saying things that don't make any sense. But this movie doesn't really treat him like that. The Apprentice approaches him as a brother, a son of a bad father, and an insecure young person just trying to make a name for himself. It's interesting that Donald Trump was suing this film and really causing trouble with its distribution, because in many ways, The Apprentice is the most serious depiction we've seen of him. Like, media nowadays just kind of tries to laugh at him and doesn't even treat him like a real dude. But this movie does that. And I thought it was successful. I mean, this is a pretty funny movie and is always quick to highlight hypocrisy, but it never jumps the shark. This movie treats him like a person. I mean, like a bad person, but I think that's mostly due to his own actions. A Wedding is Robert Altman's massive ensemble film, all set at a wedding. While this might not be as philosophically or politically interesting as his epics like Nashville or Shortcuts, it's great. There's so many characters in this film, and it's definitely hard to keep track of, but as with all Altman movies, you just gotta remember to chill out. Just let this movie come at you with its concoction of snooty, neurotic wedding guests that always have a thought that they think is worth saying. All of the characters in this film will make you feel like you're perfectly put together. It's the messiest and most outwardly comedic film I've seen from Altman, while still offering those surprisingly acute observations that he's known for. By the end, I mean, it's kind of difficult to know what actually happened. I mean, so many wheels are spinning that they just eventually fall off. But just in time, the credits roll on a note that is charming and leaves you wanting to watch it again, which I did the next day. Bring Them Down was actually great. I mean, I'm not saying that it's a super thought-provoking movie or anything too original, but it does what it does well. A lot of people have been comparing Bring Them Down to a Greek tragedy, and so I'm here to tell you that it feels like a Greek tragedy, but set in Ireland and features rap as a storytelling mechanic. So it's a story of the dueling downfalls of two shepherds played by Barrett Keoghan and Christopher Abbott. This is indeed a feel-bad movie, so if you don't want to feel bad, you now know what not to watch. But this is a very telegraphed film about the little misunderstandings and immature actions that lead to grave mistakes and surprising violence. It's very much about the cycle of violence and doesn't take a whole lot of investigation to get to that conclusion, but it's still quite clever and is very gripping. The score is really interesting interesting and atmospheric, and the editing keeps you on your feet. Bring Them Down is solid, successful independent cinema that most people will not know is a thing. So how about you go be cool and different and watch this movie? You're Cordially Invited is a comfortable watch. Like, it doesn't inspire any truly awful feelings in me, but if you were to find the collective IQ of every character in this film, it barely might have a chance at cracking 100. This is a movie that is only brought on by the stupidity and overly meanness of its characters. And sometimes it's fun and motivated, while other times it's just confusing. It's a great premise of Will Ferrell and Reese Witherspoon as the father and sister of two brides who have to share their hotel venue for the weddings. There's some great sight gags and the occasionally funny line of dialogue, but it's a mostly pretty passive film. You can watch this movie and have a good time, but it will quickly evacuate your brain after the credits roll. But you know, I see that there is a place for that. For a movie that came out in January, it could have been a lot worse. So thank you, Reese Witherspoon and Will Ferrell. You made me feel very little, but in a way that wasn't terribly awful. So, you know, I think that that's good. Hard Eyes is this year's holiday slasher, and yeah, it feels like all of the other holiday slashers in that it is perfectly okay. This is about a killer who shows up in different cities each year to kill couples, but what if the killer just thought two people were a couple even though they weren't? So this not couple that is hunted by Hard Eyes are played by Olivia Holt and Mason Gooding, two people who are reasonably charismatic, and because they're attractive, of course, they're gonna fall in love. That being said, some of the character writing isn't as cliche as you would expect. Hard Eyes is all about being cynical about Valentine's Day, and sometimes I think the movie's anger is pretty fresh. But of course, past the first act, it becomes your standard fare. It's not bad though. There are some nicely executed scenes of suspense, and the gore is sometimes pretty badass. Listen, if you think you would like Hard Eyes, you will probably like Hard Eyes. This movie will not surprise you, but I think it'll leave most people feeling pleasant enough. And you know, I guess during the winter, that's really all that matters. Evil Does Not Exist was another movie represented on my best of the year list, and it is truly a knockout. Now, if someone happens upon Evil Does Not Exist and isn't really interested in movies, they'll probably hate it. It's very slow and doesn't announce itself in any way, but it's an incredibly precise vision of gentrification and how morality is never as clear as we'd like it to be. Evil Does Not Exist might make some people fall asleep, but if you really give it a shot, I think you'll find that it's an extremely human and universal film. Red Eye is a Wes Craven thriller that all takes place on a plane in which Cillian Murphy is a really bad guy and Rachel McAdams just does not want to be around him. I don't really want to give away more than that because there actually are some kind of interesting turns that the movie takes, and it's always delivered with that Wes Craven pace. Red Eye is not the most thoughtful movie or interested in any deeper philosophy, but it's a tense thriller that can easily supply a Friday night. Come the third act, it just turns into schlock, but I was laughing a lot. Red Eye won't be like anyone's favorite movie, but I don't think that there's a whole lot to dislike about it. It works as a contained thriller on a plane, really delivering that claustrophobia, but when it turns into a slasher, Red Eye doesn't skip a beat. I hadn't seen Knocked Up until this month, and I must say that it feels like another Judd Apatow movie. It's filled with pretty long scenes of dialogue in which actors just try to one-up one another, and as always, I had fun. I think Seth Rogen and Katherine Heigl have genuinely good chemistry, and while it kind of muddies itself up with the dueling couple of Leslie Mann and Paul Rudd, there are some neat observations about marriage and parenting. After this movie, Entertainment Weekly released an article about the 50 smartest people working in Hollywood, and Judd Apatow was ranked number 1. Obviously, that ranking might be looked at with some speculation today, but at the time, Judd Apatow was just making really great crowd pleaser movies. Knocked Up is a relatable and down-to-earth comedy with an outlandish edge. Some scenes hit harder than others, but I mean that pink eye scene, come on, that's comedy gold.
You can get pink eye from farting in a pillow?
Totally.
That's awesome.
Yeah, but you gotta be bare-assed.
Jesus.
I think it's also interesting to think about a Hollywood that was on the brink of Judd Apatow ruling it. So thank you, Knocked Up, for reminding me of the bygone era of 2007. It was a neat trip. Captain America Brave New World was quite boring. I didn't really care about much. I was kind of just letting the movie breeze right by me. I mean, seeing Red Hulk was fun, and I liked that it was clearly an attempt at saying something about geopolitics. Obviously, the movie failed to illuminate anything about the subject matter, but I guess the fact that it was there was something. Anthony Mackie and Harrison Ford aren't very good in the movie, probably because they shot it in the course of over way too long. I found Captain America Brave New World to be neither brave, nor new, nor world. I don't know. I feel like maybe if this came out years ago, I would be more angry, but right now it's just kind of the norm. I'm more exhausted by the discourse surrounding this film than by the movie itself, which, by the way, is not a great place to be. And so I'm kind of just apathetic toward the MCU at the moment, but you know, what's new? Kinds of Kindness held up very well on a rewatch, but my parents did fall asleep while watching it, and technically, I get it. It's an anthology movie that really requires you to question these situations and character dynamics. You have to meet the movie on its level. I think Yorgos' work that is written and directed by himself is a little harder to recommend than his collaborations with Tony McNamara. His sense of humor is so specific and tough to get a grasp on, so I could see some people saying Kinds of Kindness was the funniest movie of the year, while other people would be surprised to hear that it's a comedy. And while it might sound weird, I think that's kind of a cool trait for a comedy to have. The three stories all offer some different food for thought, and I think the first and third stories are probably the most focused in their ideas about control, but the second is this weird, almost David Lynch-like take on paranoia and trauma. Also something about dogs, but I'm still not completely sure what that's about. There Will Be Blood is obviously the best movie I watched all month. I mean, there's not a top 100 movies list without There Will Be Blood getting mentioned, and for good reason. This is maybe the greatest contemporary American epic, which is weird to say because the cast isn't that large, and it doesn't even feature a whole lot of principal locations, and yet it is an all-encompassing story of capitalism and religion. It feels biblical in its themes while also having the grit of a documentary. No plot beat feels like a beat, it just feels like that's what happened. Obviously, Daniel Day-Lewis delivers one of the most committed performances of all time that is almost satirical in its intensity. I'm not really sure that There Will Be Blood is my favorite of Paul Thomas Anderson's filmography. I mean, the man just has too many good films, but it's undeniably a movie of a generation. There Will Be Blood is impossible to cast aside and features so many truths. I mean, money is good, but you know what's better? Family. I'm pretty sure, I think. Say Anything was not as good as There Will Be Blood, but it was charming enough. This is written and directed by Cameron Crowe, who is a man of great highs and also lows. Have you seen We Bought a Zoo? It's a film where they bought a zoo. It's not very good. But he also made Almost Famous, which is like maybe the best movie ever, so you never know. And this is Cameron Crowe still very much in the John Hughes era, and yeah, it feels that way while also still having a bit more of an edge than you would expect. There is a subplot about the IRS, which is like, what the fuck was that? But for the most part, it's a nice romantic comedy that features some good performances, and when the movie wants to be funny, I do think it's funny. Say Anything is a harmless movie that obviously spoke to the teenagers of its time, and while it doesn't necessarily work on that same level today, it's an interesting time capsule, and John Cusack totally deserved the hype. I then watched The Big Chill, so apparently I was just in the mood for movies that don't really hold up anymore, but I also thought this was pretty good. I think that there is a lot to make fun of, as it's a hangout movie where baby boomers in their 30s reflect on their lives after one of their friends passed away. And you know, for people in my generation, it kind of feels like our job is to not have sympathy for baby boomers. And you can tell that like some of my generation feels that way if you go into the Letterboxd reviews. But here there are some well-written scenes of dialogue that feel natural and carry a dark sense of humor that was unexpected. Sadly, at other times, it does feel kind of forced and overly dramatic. That being said, the cast keeps you locked in. I mean, John Hurt talking about how life really sucks hard sometimes, and Jeff Goldblum playing an actual character was perfect. I think the thing that illuminates a lot of the problems here is the pace. The Big Chill is slower than it should be, and it definitely over relies on its soundtrack that just refuses to stop. But some of that angst reads nicely, some of it not so much. The Big Chill is a movie that is speaking directly to you. The characters are therapizing right in front of your eyes, and you know, if you're interested in what they have to say, you'll probably get something out of it. But if you're not interested, then you know, it's a lost cause. You're just not gonna like it. For myself, I thought it was serviceable. If this movie is the voice of a generation, then I guess I thought that voice was pretty okay. Fast Food Nation is Richard Linklater at his most unsubtle and rebellious, as it's an Altman-inspired ensemble piece weaving multiple stories surrounding the unethical and unsafe cow farming used to supply a famous fast food chain's burgers. You get a glimpse into many people's lives as they have some sort of connection to the meat. And when this movie works, I think it really works. There's a scene with Bruce Willis as the centerpiece of the film, and it's a well-written dialogue scene that is tense, funny, and kind of scary. And with a cast of Ethan Hawke, Patricia Arquette, and Paul Dano, I think that there is kind of a comforting feeling whenever you watch this movie, which is weird because the movie is overall meant to be scary. The ending is this very heavy-handed documentary-style footage of cows being butchered, and wow, you know, I think it gets the point across. It's just not very earned. And so I'm pretty mixed on this. In some ways, it has that Linklater texture and feeling of spontaneity, but then a scene will happen where it feels manufactured for maximum political and social impact. Fast Food Nation is totally an interesting movie and one of, you know, supposed importance, but sadly, I don't think that importance was fully realized. The Monkey is Osgood Perkins' newest after Longlegs, and it's a bold move. Longlegs was touted as the scariest movie of the decade, and while it wasn't that entirely, that first act was chilling to the highest degree. But The Monkey doesn't have those aspirations at all. This is a comedy. I mean, it has horror. There are images that out of context are, I guess, scary. But the movie's two main goals are to make you laugh and to make you think. A lot of the film works as Final Destination-esque murder vignettes where things go wrong and people die. And of course, the movie capitalizes on this to say that death has no rules. You really can't control it. And while I think sometimes The Monkey was able to pique my interest, the titular monkey's box has the words "like life" written on it, and I thought that was pretty clever. But the story in its entirety just didn't really grab me. On a character level, the two brothers angle wasn't very well drawn, and the structure seems slightly thrown together. There's enough to like about The Monkey, but you can tell that it's not exactly the form in which Osgood Perkins thrives most. The Gorge is a bad movie made by good filmmakers. Now, a lot of people have seen this film. It's actually Apple TV Plus's most watched film debut, and so if you ever think that cinema is alive and well, it's not. But I get why this is a movie. It's a neat concept where two people have to guard a gorge that may or may not be the opening to hell, and what if those two people fell in love? And this is the type of high concept that makes producers shard out a production budget, but it's clear that the screenplay didn't know where to go with the concept. It's a romance that features no charm or humanity. It's an action film in which the action seems useless, and the mystery is so predictable and lame. The only thing that worked here were the horror elements, which makes sense because Scott Derrickson, the director here, comes from that genre. But the horror stuff is pretty limited, especially as the movie goes on. And this movie is 2 hours long. So no, I wasn't all that happy watching it. Bobby is a movie that isn't talked about anymore, probably because even when it did come out, people didn't talk about it. This is a big ensemble movie that features many interlocking stories that all lead to Robert Kennedy's assassination in 1968. It's got a good cast of Sharon Stone, William H. Macy, Anthony Hopkins, and Nick Cannon. Not so good on that one. And Bobby, similar to Fast Food Nation, has very hefty ambitions. It's certainly in the same political vein as Sorkin's work on The West Wing. The problem is that the dialogue and individual narratives aren't compelling enough to support this structure. And because of the very obvious dialogue in the soapy score, the roaming camera borrowed from Robert Altman doesn't read all that well either. Bobby is supposed to have this feeling of dread concerning this impending assassination, but the film is never really able to grab you in the moment. Sure, it's sad and has ideas, but it's very slight and probably didn't even hold up the day that it came out. I think that there is entertainment value here that can satisfy a certain part of the brain, but Bobby is clearly a movie that doesn't work on all the levels that I think it wanted to. All right, well, I guess that was kind of a harsh way to end the video, but it happened. We will find out who wins Best Picture, which I'm sure everyone's going to be so happy about it. Everyone's going to agree with the Best Picture, because if it's the Best Picture, then it's the best movie ever. We all know that. So that'll be great. Everyone will be having fun this upcoming weekend. That'll just be really good. But yeah, I am excited for the Oscars, and I'll let you know how I feel about all that shit. But until then, I'll see you later, and try and have fun, I guess.